Hi, everyone. I'm Marc-Andre Ferguson. I'm the editing and effects evangelist for Autodesk Smoke. Welcome to the Autodesk booth and a great presentation with a great writer and director, Alexis Hurkman. How many of you know Alexis from his Resolve antics? All right, so Alexis and I go way back, I guess. We did a lot of presentations together. We were talking about the idea of producing a book. And to produce a training manual, like Alexis does really well. And how many of you have read his color correction handbook? Two.
It's really
Cool.
good.
It's really good.
Actually, I'm doing a second edition, so it'll be even better in December.
So when we started talking about producing a manual for Smoke, he said, well, it would be interesting to have material that we could use to do the training. And oh, by the way, I've got a great idea for a movie. So how about I talk to you about that? And lo and behold, a few months later, we have a film. And I'm happy to let Alexis talk about how he produced the film, how Smoke was involved in the making of this film, and how you guys will all be able to use some of these scenes to learn how to use Smoke. Take it away.
Thanks. So probably a better title for this presentation would be Smoke for Filmmakers. Because even though I work in post, I work as a colorist, I used to be an editor, I've done a lot of visual effects over the years and broadcast design. At heart, I'm an independent filmmaker, and I've always been a screenwriter, and I've always worked on small projects, did a feature in 2006. So when I look at a piece of software, the first thing I ask is, what can this do for my film? I don't really care about the features. I care about, what story can it help me to tell with its feature set. So to give you a taste of the project that I did, and admittedly, it's still a work in progress. We're almost done. But there's a ton of effects, as you can imagine, being a Smoke project. So, but this is a trailer that a very talented editor in LA, Monica Daniels, cut together for me last week. I literally color corrected it 2 hours before I hit the plane. So it's hot off the presses. And this will give you a taste of what the project is about.
Hey, honey. Happy anniversary again.
I love you.
I love you.
No! People are starting to ask about you. I'm almost done. With what? What's the big mystery project?
It's personal.
It's bad enough that your program is based on a theory that nobody cares about.
So it's called The Place Where You Live. So the story is that of a professor of physics who's abducted by her counterpart from an alternate dimension, who wants to switch places with her to be in a dimension where her husband is still alive. So she's abducted, and that's the backstory. The actual story is about her rebuilding the machine to take her back. And right there, it's going to be an effects-heavy film. It's going to be duplicating the actress. We've got a dimensional doorway, all kinds of crazy stuff going on. My last film was a real grueling cinema verite-style survival story in the desert. So for my next project, I really wanted to do something very visual, very lush, very kind of action-y a little bit. And more to the point, I really, as a director, am focused on visuals. I really like to tell stories as visually as I can. And this is one of the first pages of the script. And people think just because I'm a writer, I love to write endless dialogue and have people talk all the time. But in fact, this is one of my favorite pages because it only has 3 lines of dialogue, and one of them is ow. I really wanted to tell the story through images. I really wanted to tell the story through VFX, which gets a bad rap because oftentimes visuals, people try to substitute them for a story. But for me, I want the visuals to actually tell the story. And so when I wrote this project, I really was looking at Smoke already because Smoke is such a visually oriented tool and it has this great fusion of visual effects and editing all in one place, which I thought I could really use to good advantage. So one of the biggest parts of the movie, and one of the effects that informs the character of Nina, the main character of the story, is this big machine. She's a particle physicist, and I really wanted that lab set to come across and show what an impressive scientist she was and how much work she was going to for all of this. Being an independent filmmaker at heart, I knew that resources were going to be limited. I never have enough money. Who here has enough of a budget for their projects ever? So I didn't get real specific about the machine until I found the shooting location. And we had a pair of stages that were made available to us. These are actually band rehearsal spaces that my wife pictured here. She was the art director and wardrobe for the movie, and she's frankly the reason why my movies look so good. Tremendous art direction. She's a stylist professionally and an actress. And she used this space to rehearse a play last year, and we got to rent the spaces for a song. So I saved money by, instead of having one big space, one big sound stage to build a huge set, which would have been expensive, we got 2 little spaces for cheap for a month, and we built our sets into there. So once I knew what the space was going to look like, I sat down with my DP, Bo Hakala, and we talked about how we wanted to cover the room, what we wanted to do visually with these scenes, and kind of came up with a rough floor plan that made sense for what we wanted to do. With this in hand, I was able to hand it off to Ryan Beckwith, who's a storyboard artist in New York that I work with a lot. He's also been doing more concept art lately. And he whipped out a bunch of really quick thumbnails for different machine designs. This was the one that I liked the best. I like this kind of cobbled together look. So once I had a general idea of how the machine would interface with the actual set, I sat down, drew out a floor plan, and started figuring out really how these 2 sets were going to fit together. If I had a ton of money, I would have rented a huge soundstage and built this giant set with 2 conjoined rooms. So when the dimensional doorway opens up, we'll just pull the wall out, and there it is, no effects needed. I couldn't afford that, but I knew I was going to use Smoke. I knew Smoke had really great keying. So I went ahead and just did 2 separate sets connected by green screen. So that connection was going to be all digital. So that's a case where I was trying to save money by using effects. Once I had the floor plan down, Kaylin and her crew were able to go ahead and start building the sets and putting in the green screen. So this really illustrates something that's important to me as a director. I like having a half and half approach. I like physical things for the actors to be working with, but then I like to have big animated crazy stuff that I can't afford to build, and so that's what the green screen is for. So I really like this 50-50 approach. After the shoot, I sent some stills to Ryan, who did a more final rendering to be used as reference by BJ West, who's a CG artist in the Bay Area. And he's using 3D Studio Max, and he built this virtual set, which is the extension of that lab. So with all this in mind, I knew I was going to have to be really, really organized during the shoot. So here's a quick look at some of the pre-visualization I did. I took that floor plan, which I made in SketchUp, Google SketchUp, and I extruded it into an actual space. And I measured the sets relentlessly. I wanted this to match because I knew the spaces were tight and I didn't know how much room I was going to have to maneuver. Now, there are 2 locations that I needed to shoot and worry about, because whenever that dimensional doorway was open, we could see through the doorway into the other space. So there are scenes where one scene has 2 locations, and on top of that, I've got the actress and her double. This is Dawn Krasnowski, and her double is Emily Muskin. And so for each location, I had 2 costume makeup changes for a total of 4 combinations and all the coverage. So you can see how complex this was. So using that model, I went ahead and created a set of very comprehensive storyboards, really practicing directing the film before I got onto the set. And I actually did 3 separate passes of storyboarding to make sure that I knew exactly how everything was going to fit together, so that when we eased into production, I could deal with the schedule. We had a 3-day schedule. We really needed 5 days, but I could afford 3 days, so that's what we did. Day 1 was the lab, day 2 was the office, and day 3 was all the B-roll, all the live action stuff elsewhere. So we had to be really organized. I have to give huge thanks to Molly Katagiri, who you can see up in the corner. She was my assistant director, and she took my really ambitious set of storyboards and turned it into a schedule that had us running no later than 12 midnight every shoot day. So everyone got to sleep, which was nice. You don't always get to do that on an indie film. And she also had the bright idea of taping all the storyboards to the wall outside the stage so that we could constantly refer to them. I swear to God, every other shot, the actor or somebody was going, okay, how does this fit into the, which shot is this again? I mean, I could barely keep it straight, so thank God we had the boards. On top of that, there was a lot of bookkeeping. Bo Hakala, the DP, had to measure every single angle, the camera orientation, the height, the tilt, because the cameras in the shot and the reverse had to match. Otherwise, the plates wouldn't line up. So there was just a lot of information we needed to keep track of. But you can see in the final shoot, these are some stills from the raw material, we actually matched the boards more or less as they were designed. Got all the plates we needed, and it was pretty straightforward. It was pretty by the numbers, which was great. So some technical details. We shot with a Red 1 MX using super speed primes. It was a great combination of look. I loved the lenses. I've graded Red 1 MX media before, so I knew it would have good data, but Red 1s can be rented for a song. I didn't need the world's most cutting-edge camera. I just wanted to have a good camera that I could afford and get a few more crew members on the set. So that was a big help. We shot with timecode synced audio separately. So at the end of the process, when I eased into post-production, I had a set of R3D media and broadcast wave media that I married together in DaVinci Resolve and turned into red-log film-encoded ProRes 4x4. Now, ordinarily, I do prefer to work with raw media. The files can be smaller, especially with R3D media. And it gives you a little more flexibility if you need to change how you debayer. You just have more flexibility. But for this, I knew I was going to be working with a bunch of different compositing artists, and I didn't want somebody to get the bright idea that their own debayer settings would be better than what I asked for. I've had this happen on projects I've color corrected, and it's impossible to match differently debayered clips. It's just a pain, especially when they're in the same scene. So I gave everyone one set of media, and after 4 months of working with this, editing it, and doing some of the compositing myself, it's keyed beautifully. It's been a very, very robust workflow. So here's how everything fit together. For this project, Smoke was right in the center. All the editing, all the compositing was done in Smoke. DaVinci Resolve did the dailies creation, exported ProRes 4x4, which I brought into Smoke, and I actually ended up doing the offline edit with the ProRes 4x4 media. Smoke could handle it no problem, and I figure, why do a reconform if I don't have to? I'm not a laptop editor. I just work in my bay. On top of that, I got additional elements from Brian Olson at Splice here in Minneapolis. He created a lot of the graphics elements that were used for those heads-up displays, those floating displays. And he was using Adobe Illustrator and After Effects, feeding ProRes 4x4 clips to Smoke. And then BJ West was working in 3D Studio Max, and he was giving me OpenEXR files. So all the media was coming in the Smoke. Smoke is where everything was happening. So I wanted to go through a few shots that I worked on inside of Smoke, and what interests me and what I really want to relate is how useful it was to have a little bit of compositing on the timeline. And by a little, I really mean a lot. So first off, I've got this heads-up display shot. I knew it was going to be complicated ultimately, but this is the footage I started out with. To have the actress hit her marks from angle to angle, we put tape markers on the wall in front of her, so she was always able to swipe in the right place, be looking at the right thing. With this put together, usually in an offline edit, I end up doing something like this. You know, I know there's supposed to be a floating window there, so I'll just do a cheap transform. I'll do an inset. Looks fine. I might put VFX in progress down in the corner. But while this helps me to get the timings right and figure out which part of the performance I want, it's not helpful for test audiences. And I don't know how many times I've tried to get an opinion from somebody. I give them a cut, somebody in the industry, and what I get back is, well, you know, I think it's okay, but I was really distracted by the unfinished effects. It's hard for me to imagine what it's supposed to look like, so I don't get my opinion, and it's a pain. So in Smoke, it's an easy thing to, because it has an integrated 3D environment right from the timeline, and it's got motion tracking that's accessible right from the timeline, for me to go ahead and actually float in a clip into my rough cut. So every test viewer I had no problem recognizing what was supposed to be happening. There's a floating screen in front of her. I didn't have to worry about people being distracted. And I also had timing and positioning information that the compositing artist who was doing the final could play off of. So I didn't have to give him a bunch of notes. Here are all of the layers that Brian Olson put together for me. He really created a toolkit of graphics that could be used to assemble all of the heads-up displays throughout the project. And then Aaron Vasquez in New York took all of those elements in my video and created this. Again, all inside of Smoke.
Hey, honey. Happy anniversary again. I called Arturos. I told you they would already have our reservations booked. You owe me that martini. I love you.
I really love the shallow depth of focus he was able to achieve with the graphics. It's very elegant. So here's one of my other favorite effects from the movie. This is the dimensional doorway itself. This is really kind of the big event, so I wanted it to be impressive. And this was composited by Brian Mulligan, an effects artist in Indiana. And again, what we started out with this time, 2 plates. So we've got this green screen here, and I'm the one who told the DP to stop lighting the green screen. We needed more time, so that shadow is my fault. And then this is a mirror plate gag. This was actually Bo's idea. The way the shots had to fit together, we didn't have enough room in the lab set to be able to pull the camera back far enough to have her be the distance from the camera that she would have been if she were really in another room on the other side of the wall. So we got more camera distance by getting a huge mirror, having her act in reverse, and having her do her eye lines in reverse, which was a lot of fun, let me tell you. But that's why we had this mirror. The very first thing I did in Smoke, this is before I edited any of the scenes, I was desperate to see if the angles were going to line up. So another nice thing about Smoke is you have the same keyer available in the timeline as a timeline effect that you've got in Connect Effects, which is the much deeper node-based compositing system. So once you learn that keyer, you can do really nice keys from the timeline, which can also be recycled in Connect Effects for the final composite. So this shot was either going to work beautifully or it was going to be a pain. Fortunately, Bo's brilliant, and he got the trigonometry right, and it worked. So the next thing I did is, again, I wanted the test audience to have something more real world to look at, so to speak. So I built this composite myself. I wanted to play around a little bit with the look of the doorway, see what it would look like if the other side were tinted. So I got to play around a little bit. And then I handed this off to Brian Mulligan, and again, he had the timing I wanted for the doorway, he had the position for the doorway, he had a lot of information, and we just needed a very short conversation, and then he was able to take the ball and run with it and turn it into this. Which I just love the look of that. And then Aaron Vasquez layered one of his HUDs on top of this shot. So I'd like to show you one more shot, and this is more showing off than anything else. Now, this is a work in progress. This is being done by Joel Osis in Australia. This is the hardest shot in the movie, which is why I call it the monster shot. One of the things that I did with a lot of the effects, I've done compositing in the past. It's not necessarily my current skill set, although I've been doing a lot more of it. But I know how hard 3D tracking is. And I didn't want to get bogged down in having every other shot be a 3D camera resolve shot. So there's a lot of locked shots, but I knew the only way I was going to sell the movie with some locked shots was by having one really spectacular camera move that involved the 3D machine in the lab. Then mixing this in with some locked shots and a handful of very small camera move shots where 2D tracking would work really was an effective combination. So with this setup, I handed the shots off to Joel, and he took a really long time. He worked hard to resolve the camera and get camera data that looked good. Handed that off to BJ West, who then built his machine around the geometry of the room to marry them together. And once the machine model and animation was set up, we actually contracted with a render farm in Singapore that specializes in 3D Studio Max rendering. And they went ahead and rendered a set of passes. So we've got a beauty pass, a Z-depth pass, and a few lighting passes for effects. I gave all that back to Joel Osis, and then he put this together. Again, this is a work in progress. It's not color corrected. There are a few holes here and there, but it was something I wanted to show because he's been working so hard on it. And again, all of the compositing for this is being done in Smoke. And that's exactly why I like to have physical elements. I hate it when an actor's just standing in the middle of a stage and nothing's happening.
Hey, Nina. Hey, Carol. Can I swing by your house and pick up that drive?
Yeah, sure.
So that's the toughest series of shots in the movie. So once everything's done, once the editing and compositing is done in Smoke, and this is a workflow I've done both for a teaser I did in March and for the trailer, basically I export a set of AAF files to Kelly Piclo at Splice here in Minneapolis, and he's been doing the audio mix. And he's giving me back a WAV mixdown file. Then I send an EDL and ProRes off to DaVinci Resolve, which I'm using for the grade. And when the grade's done in Resolve, I've been exporting a flattened QuickTime file, basically a video equivalent of a mixdown file, bringing that back in the Smoke. And in Smoke, I'm doing titling and all the other finishing that I need for the final output. And that's my workflow. So that's how Smoke looks to an independent filmmaker like me. And it's been an incredibly useful tool. I could not have made this film without that tool. So thank you, Autodesk.
I think you've got one last thing to show us, don't you?
I do. Do we have time?
Just about.
You guys want to see one more thing? Yeah! So this is the teaser that I put together in March. This is a finished scene. This is the first scene of the movie.
Hey, honey, happy anniversary again. I called Arturos. I told you they would already have our reservations booked. You owe me that martini. I love you.
Carol, what's up?
I wanted to find out if you were okay switching days for cluster access. UCSC's geology department needs some time-critical seismic simulations on Big G.
Sure. When can I get in?
This Thursday?
Sounds great.
Thanks, Nina.
Surprised.
So there you have it. This is what indie filmmakers can do with the power of smoke. Thank you, Alexis, for
Thank you.
giving us a short tour of how this was produced. If you guys are interested, you will always be able to do some of the work that Alexis did, thanks to his book that is coming out really soon. It should be ready really soon. Here, Smoke Essential book. Movie will be out soon too. We'll be able to see that, and you guys will be able to try out some of these effects and learn smoke on the way. So thank you, Alexis. Thank you very much for coming. And if you got questions, Alexis will be hanging around, and then Ken Allure is over there to do more Smoke 2013 demos. Thank you very much.